To me, entrepreneurs are all about solving a problem and taking on the risk necessary to solve it well.
What are the secrets that drive the businesses you love or nonprofits you admire? Join us as we uncover the surprising ideas at the intersection of causes and brands. I'm Dave Rayleigh.
And I'm Carly Berna. Each episode, learn from leaders of nonprofits and companies that will give you insights that you can put into action. This is the Purpose and Profit Podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Virtuous, the only responsive CRM that provides fundraising, marketing, and volunteer tools you need to create personal connections with your donors and grow giving. Learn more at virtuous.org. Welcome to the show today. It's an honor to introduce today's guest, Sheeba Philip, and a double honor because Sheeba was in season 1 of the Purpose and Profit podcast. And so, Sheeba, you are our first repeat guest.
Love it.
So it's so interesting with these interviews. We spend, 30 minutes and you just barely can scratch the surface of somebody's experience. And so super excited to have you back. For those of you who are new to Sheeba, she's a visionary leader. She's passionate about building redemptive ventures that shape a better world. Her career spans nearly 25 years at both the intersection of business and purpose, where she's transformed iconic brands like Oreo, JCPenney, Jell-O, Ritz, while also leading impactful nonprofit initiatives to combat human trafficking and create jobs for women in East Africa. Sheeba currently leads a global advisory practice equipping CEOs and purpose-driven brands and organizations to achieve transformational growth. So she's revitalized multi-billion-dollar businesses and mentored faith-driven entrepreneurs. She's got pretty amazing leadership expertise. She's also been featured, by the way, on InStyle magazine's list of 50 women making the world a better place, and holds an MBA from Harvard Business School. Welcome back to the show, Sheeba.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks, Carly. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Did you know that on the fastest growing brands list of 2024, among millennials, the number one fastest growing brand is Ritz crackers?
I am actually surprised by that.
I was a little my wife loves Ritz, but I thought, I wonder what millennials are thinking these days.
That doesn't surprise me, given that generation loves the throwback stuff. They're like all about playing back to what we used to like growing up, our generation. So I'm not surprised. There's a nostalgia about it. I would have thought Oreo, to be honest.
I would have definitely have given more. Unrelated to this episode, Carly and I have recently texted about Oreos. So she and I both agree with you wholeheartedly.
Actually, when I think about Ritz crackers and millennials, I'm like, this is so on brand for millennials because they love a good charcuterie board, but they're like not going to get the high end crackers. They're going to get like the Ritz, and that's what they're going to make their like charcuterie board with. So that's my theory.
That's very insightful. Yes, I would agree.
As a millennial speaking, yes. So I love, your background. You talk a lot about, this kind of entrepreneurial mindset you have, but you've also worked in nonprofits, which is great for this podcast where we talk both sides. You've also worked with super different size organizations. But one of the things I love is like you bring this entrepreneurial mindset to everything that you've done in your career. Can you talk a little bit about, for those listening, like how can you get in that mindset, even if you've never started your own business, but like, how can you still have that entrepreneurial mindset?
Great question. It's interesting, as I was prepping for this conversation, I wanted to think about what defines an entrepreneur, like what exactly is it? We use that word so much, and it's, so I was like, let's ask ChatGPT what they say. And I actually have it in front of me. They say an entrepreneur is an individual who identifies a need or opportunity in the market and takes the initiative to create organize and operate a business venture or nonprofit venture to address it. And I thought to myself, okay, that's actually a pretty good definition of what entrepreneurship is. And the things I think strike me the most about that definition is this idea of opportunity and this idea of risk. With regards to opportunity, for me, it's around, I always tell entrepreneurs this, whether you're a nonprofit or for profit, or if you're working in a big organization and you want to have an entrepreneurial mindset, it's this big question of what is the problem you're actually solving? What is the thing you're actually going after? And what's the pain point? What's the opportunity? What's the need for your customer, for the consumer, for your beneficiary? To me, that is the big kind of heart of entrepreneurial ventures and having a great mindset as an entrepreneur is a problem, you're passionate about solving it. And the second thing I would say, kind of going back to that Chat GPT definition, is this idea of risk. Are you willing to take the risk necessary to address that problem? And if you actually look up the definition of an entrepreneur, whether it's Merriam's dictionary or ChatGPT, they all talk about this idea of inordinate risk. You're taking actually more risk than the average person. So in my mind, that's risk of failure. It's financial risk. It's risk of reputation potentially. So I think to me, entrepreneurs are all about solving a problem and taking on the risk necessary to solve it well.
I read a book once that I feel like you would probably agree with this, but it said that the first entrepreneur was God because entrepreneurship is creating something out of nothing. And He was the first person to create something out of nothing. And I was like, I love this definition because that's really what an entrepreneur does, right? Like they see a problem, there's nothing there to solve it. And so they create something. So
right.
I love that idea of like, he's the first entrepreneur.
I've never heard that, Carly, and that is so beautiful. It's so true, right? He sees, and it's all about opportunity. He saw a need, and if you take it one step further, when Jesus comes to Earth, it's to solve a problem. It's It's to solve the problem of humanity, and so and he took on the total risk of his death and resurrection on the cross. So that plays into the definition so beautifully.
Sheeba, one of the other things as we think about entrepreneurship, a lot of, the commentary and conversations around the idea of a vision, what's your vision, which is very, seems to be a good thing. But it does seem like vision doesn't go very far without a clear strategy. So what do you recommend? You coach both business, for-profit and not-for-profit entrepreneurs. What do you recommend to strategically bringing your vision to life?
Yeah, so, I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, we do talk about this idea of vision. I have a vision. I want to achieve something in the world. And great entrepreneurs with a great mindset, as Carly, talked about, have just tremendous vision for how they want to solve the world's problems. And I do find that the biggest challenge is strategy. And that word, though, is kind of, I think, overused as well. And for me, this idea of strategy is really about how are you actually going to create value? So a lot of times organizations go from big vision to very tactical plans. Okay, we have a marketing plan, we have a fundraising plan, we want to launch this product, this idea, and they've completely forgotten the layer of strategy. And strategy is not planning. Planning comes after strategy. So you've got big vision, this idea of, okay, there's a problem in the world. There's a need that needs to be solved or met. That's the vision. The strategy is how am I actually going to win? How am I actually going to create value for that person and solving that problem? Because many could actually go ahead and solve it, but how are you uniquely going to do it and do it well? And that's thinking about it's like, how am I going to show up as a product or as an experience? How am I going to craft my service offering to meet that need? Am I going to be focused in the US or focused globally? What's my pricing? Am I going to be a low cost provider or create a ton of value and be a bit more expensive? So that idea of strategy comes next. And then there's planning. So I think oftentimes what you find is you jump right into tactics, execution. And I think the big question, is how am I going to actually create the value? How am I going to win? And I will also say, this is sometimes controversial for nonprofits that I advise, is how are you going to be competitive? It's a controversial question because nobody wants to say that in the nonprofit space. But the reality is you're fighting for donor dollars. It's share of wallet. There's a limited amount of capital out there. And of course, God wants all these organizations to thrive. But you need to think about, okay, when I talk to somebody about my organization strategically, how is it different than the other organization giving clean water or solving education or helping women find jobs? And how am I doing it again differently? How am I creating a defendable advantage? To me, that's strategy, and nonprofits really, I think, sometimes miss that big layer before they start going into tactics.
So when you described that whole planning, strategy, tactics, it sounds very linear and nice and neat and clean, but entrepreneurship seems to me to be a lot maybe messier than that. Or just can you speak to what does strategy look like in the trenches?
Yeah, you're right. It is pretty messy, and it's very iterative, and it's amorphous. I think a lot of it, especially early stage venture, I have an idea. I want to get it out there. I would call there's like this MVP stage where you're just trying to create something and put it out there for a small audience to experience. You're going to get a ton of feedback and learning. You're going to optimize and optimize. And as you do that, start to form this greater strategy for how you want to scale and bring it to market. So you're right. There is a little bit of a structure, I would say, to think about, okay, even that process. Like, I'm going to have a product. How do I get it out? How do I get that feedback? So there is still structure, but you're right. You don't sometimes, strategy can be written on a paper, but you don't really know if it's even right unless you get it out there and start to test the waters a bit. So particularly in an early stage, we always talk about it as product market fit. Have you found a product that is meeting a need? Do you have an MVP, something viable that you can test? So much of what you're doing in that stage is that. And you're incubating, you're testing, you're learning, and you're scaling. So you're right. It is pretty messy, but there is, like, I think, a process that's still being woven throughout to then get you to a place where you're like, okay, I know what problem I'm solving. I believe this product is strong because of these reasons. I have a way to produce it at scale or launch it at scale. And now I'm going to go for it officially. So there is I think you're right, an early stage to that process that's a bit iterative and not as linear.
Yeah, I really like this conversation about strategy and execution because I feel like sometimes people have a lot of vision, but then they can't actually execute it. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the discipline of staying focused, especially in this entrepreneurial mindset when you see distractions that can turn into opportunities and then people get way off course from what their initial vision was. How do you stay focused on even just executing those tactics without getting totally distracted?
I think I will say first, I'd say, know your strengths and weaknesses or your development areas as a founder. So if you're naturally a gifted founder, in my experience, you're probably not going to be the person that is the most structured, disciplined executor. It's just the left brain and right brain thing. You're going to be the ideator. You're going to have a gift of wonder and innovation, always thinking futuristic. And I would say the first thing you do is find a partner. Find a partner who's the yin to your yang. And you guys know my story. I was running a startup for a long time. For about 4 years, I was the CEO of a cola, and that was founded by Brittany Underwood, who is a tremendous visionary. A strong visionary who is innovative. Thought about this beautiful idea of creating fashion jewelry to empower women in East Africa. And she decided to bring in someone like me that was more of an operator, a commercial business person that thinks in a structured way and thinks strategy and execution to complement her gifting. And I think that's what I would say to, a lot of entrepreneurs is to know yourself, know what you're good at, and find that person to help you stay focused and structured and disciplined, like Brittany did with me, bringing me in for a cola. That said, once you've got that team in place, the questions I'm always asking to CEOs that are coming to me and saying, I've got this new idea, I've got this thing I want to go do now in my organization, is kind of going back to that first question of what's the problem you're solving? And does this new thing you want to do, is it in service of the problem? Or are you trying to create another problem you're trying to solve? So it's kind of going back to the core of why you started, what your organization, is this thing squarely serving the problem is the first question. The second question is, how is it going to drain resourcing? We all live in a world of very limited resources. And I think one of the challenges of very visionary founders is they don't have a reality check of their resourcing. What is their team dealing with? What's the money in their bank account? How much time do they have? These are all pools of resources that you need to kind of look at and say, if I add this one thing, where am I at breaking point with my team, with budgets, with time? That's really, really important to kind of think through. And then the last thing I would question is, like, have you done the first thing well? A lot of people want to start the first thing and then it's half baked and they want to go on to the next idea. And again, if you're visionary, you kind of get tired of just executing. You want to quickly move to the next thing. So having someone who's a partner to you to say, hey, we've got to do the first thing we committed to well in solving that problem. Let's just be excellent at that before we start building on new things. So again, I would say, are you solving your problem well? And if you have a new idea, is in service of that problem? Are you thinking about the constraints on resources, your time, money, team, people? And then if you do this thing, is it on top of something you're already doing in an excellent way? Don't start cultivating new things if you haven't done the first thing really, really well.
Yeah. Another thing when we've talked about entrepreneurship is this idea of entrepreneurs, the visionaries, they do tend to rely on, gut feelings and instinct and yet data and data decision making, data-driven decision making is something that often sets a business apart, particularly as it becomes more mature. But I mean, how do you think about that in the entrepreneurial mindset? Like, what kind of data? Because it's so easy to get like paralyzed by data. I'm so even torn by it. It's like, how much do you get paralyzed by data, but how much, like, how do you even discern and analyze that data to make sure you're moving in the right direction?
Yeah. Going back to that definition of what makes an entrepreneur, we talked about it as, solving a problem and then, taking on the risk to solve that problem. And I think we do want entrepreneurs to be risk taking, but the risk in my mind is calculated. It is thought through. It's just not like, I'm just going to do something because I feel great about it. There is this real weightiness to how you take on that risk. And I think, to your point, data complements the instinct. So you don't want to be so burdened by data that you can't make any decisions, but you want the data to inform the risk you're trying to take. And so for me, there's a different ways of doing that. So we talked about this idea of MVP. You launch an MVP. The first thing you need to be relentless about is customer feedback. Really hearing your customer. What are they saying about your product? I was just actually on a panel for entrepreneurs and, I was telling them you should be all over your social media feedback on your product. You should be calling up your customers. You should be creating focus groups. You should be relentless about hearing what they're saying about it, good and bad, and being very quick to respond to that feedback. So to me, that is a great source of data. You'd be surprised at how many entrepreneurs start something because they're so passionate about it, but they ignore the person they're actually serving and not hearing their feedback. So to me, that's the number one thing. The other thing I would say is if you are particularly a nonprofit, hear from your donors. The people that are supporting you. They're not just there to write a check; they are partnering with you to deliver this mission. And so they often have incredible feedback on your experience, on your messaging, how you're showing up with donors. And I think that's very, very critical to hear their feedback and to be able to respond. And the third is stakeholders and partners. When you're working, in a venture, you're usually partnering up with other people. They could be service providers. They could be people that are helping you activate your operating model. Hearing from them, like what's going on in the market? What are you seeing in way of competitors? How do we measure up with the other people you're working with? Having those honest questions with partners, I think is going to be very illuminating. So to me, the data is there not to replace the instinctual gut feelings you need to be an entrepreneur. It's to complement it and to be able to then move forward with risk taking that feels measured and it feels weighted and it feels it's kind of within a realm of structure, which allows you to then seize opportunities really, really well.
Innovation is the lifeblood of any growing organization, and that's exactly what Imago Consulting does. Imago helps nonprofits and businesses grow through innovation. They publish a weekly trends report called The Wave Report. Learn more and subscribe at imago.consulting/wave report. That's imago.consulting/wave report. At the top of this podcast, we said that the last time you were on was many years ago when we started this podcast. And I was just thinking that was like at the height of the pandemic. And just all the changes that have occurred in the last so many years, along with this idea we're talking about entrepreneurship, where things don't always go as planned. Businesses have to pivot. Like you always have to be flexible. And I know, at least in my experience on the nonprofit side, we're not always that flexible. Maybe it's better on the for-profit side. But what advice would you give to those who have to pivot, who have to change, who have to adjust to whether it's like changing economic times or changing within their industry, like to be more flexible and adapt and pivot?
Yeah, I think that the pandemic was definitely a challenge for any person, whether you were in nonprofit, for profit, big business, small business. We all had to figure out this idea of agility and responsiveness. When I was running a cola, that was really challenging. I took over a startup, like as I mentioned, from me and Brittany worked together to lead that venture. It was an early stage startup. We had just closed our seed round about a month before the pandemic broke. And as I mentioned, we were creating fashion jewelry that was employing women in Africa. And so if you think about the pandemic, no one is buying jewelry. No, that is not the goods you're going after. Largely our business was sitting in wholesale. So we were selling into retailers like Neiman Marcus and Saks. Within a month of us closing our seed round, the pandemic breaks, and then Neiman Marcus files for bankruptcy. So we were in free fall. And so this is a perfect example. I share this a lot around responsiveness. The first thing was we had to figure out, okay, how do we sell a product that nobody wants? Like nobody wants jewelry in a time where they're sheltering in place. And we had to really be agile in thinking through our product line. And again, going back to what is the problem I'm trying to solve? So this problem we realized people had at the time was that they're sheltering in place, moms with their kids, trying to figure out how to entertain them, how to keep them in a place of peace and joy in a time of deep uncertainty. And well, jewelry is not going to do that, but we had or solve that problem. But we had one product called the bead kit, and it was like beads, and you can make bracelets, and you can kind of design bracelets with these beads. And it was one product we sold. It was real. It did well in Neiman Marcus. And we thought to ourselves, what if we got that bead kit in the hands of every online customer? that knows a cola as a way to bring joy and lightness in a time of a lot of despair and uncertainty. And again, it goes back to what is a problem we're solving uniquely for our consumer, and how do we do it really, really well? And so we just started marketing this one product, and it helped stabilize our revenue more than anything we had, because we just got back to the fundamentals of how do we best serve our customer, think with agility and responsiveness, and quickly pivot our entire product strategy around that. The second thing I think we did at that time was, you know, especially I'm running a company here in Dallas with the majority of my employees sitting in Uganda. There is no way to be able to drive all decision making from the top. You have to empower and you have to trust your teams. And so that's what we did. Brittany and I really had to work together to trust what was, our head of manufacturing on the ground in Uganda, trusting that they knew best how to care for employees, getting their feedback and trusting their recommendations. That's what agility looks like, is not controlling decision making, but being really responsive to your team, making them part of the decision making process and empowering them to make real time changes on the ground. And so I think those are probably the two big things I learned in the pandemic, being responsive to the needs of your consumers and adjusting your product, trusting your team to drive agile decision making. And I honestly feel like those are two things I would advise any CEO to be doing, regardless of whether you're in a pandemic or not. Let's hope that that's not going to happen again. But the reality is we are going to have things that we just cannot anticipate. And I think those two things I would advise any leader to keep hold of in face of just growing uncertain times, especially in the times that we live in now.
Yeah, that's great. I was just thinking back on our time, and by the way, we always love to end with a lightning round of questions, and so we'll go to that in just a minute. But just thinking about that entrepreneurial mindset, the having a passion for the problem, a clear vision, but also a clear strategy, and realizing that strategy might be iterative, right? It might take some testing and learning, and MVP, going into the market with something that's minimum viable and learning from that. But then also just having, candidly, the discipline is so critical. And then the last thing that really stood out to me in our conversation is just that embracing agility. So I hope, for our listeners, right, we've got both nonprofit listeners, business listeners, entrepreneurs exist in both of those organizations. You advise both of those types of entities. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that you've learned something today, that you've picked up on something. But we're not quite done, Sheeba. I've got a couple questions for you. This is just our lightning round. So you have not been prepped with these questions, so I would love to hear what your thoughts are. All right, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you could instantly become an expert in any skill, what would it be?
Oh gosh, it would be cooking. I'm about to host my family for Christmas, and this has created so much stress for me, Dave and Carly. I kid you not. I've been on blogs looking at recipes. If I just had a culinary gift, it would make the Christmas season way more enjoyable.
Pass that job off to somebody else. By the way, I love cooking, and as our listeners can tell, we're recording this during the holidays, and they can't see because this is not a video podcast, but I have a giant bandage on my thumb because of a certain Thanksgiving incident involving a potato and a mandolin slicer that we won't go into detail on. Let's just say cooking doesn't always come with benefits. But I love it. Cooking. All right. What's your guilty pleasure TV show or movie? Like your go-to?
I'm not gonna lie. I tend to. Well, actually, no. This season, I have not done it as much because I can binge a little bit on Hallmark movies during Christmas. This year, I have not. But yeah, any kind of cheesy Christmas rom-com movie on
Just bring
Netflix,
it
I'm
on.
there. I'm there. Yeah.
I love it. We just watched,
Mhm.
talk about cheesy, Noelle. Did you see Noelle with Anna Kendrick?
No, I have
Okay.
not
Yeah,
seen
it's
it.
like a more new, total Netflix cheesy rom com.
Okay.
Noelle. Look it up.
Okay.
Noelle.
All
All
right.
right. If you could donate $1 million to any cause, no questions asked, what would it be?
Oh goodness, there's many I would choose from. But I've been recently working with an organization that is incredible, helping educate the most vulnerable girls that are born into the red light district in India. And so
Okay.
to me, the space of human trafficking, of
Mm.
course, is a massive problem. $1 million is not going to be enough to fix it. But if I could focus that money, it would be on educating girls, little
Yeah.
girls that would have no chance of coming out of that desperate situation of being born into that place, but to take them out and to educate them and support that organization I'm talking about. That's what I would do.
Okay. I fully support that. What is the most random thing on your bucket list? Now we're getting deep here.
Oh
A,
my
do you have a bucket
gosh.
list? And if so, what is the most random thing on it? Or what would be the most random thing? I can add some things to my bucket list.
I don't have a bucket list. I will say that I do have a bucket list of travel destinations that I want to
Oh.
experience, but that's not random.
No, but what's one of those destinations that would be maybe not
Ooh,
a conventional?
okay. I would love to go to Morocco. That is on my list. One of the ones I recently wanted to, it was interesting. I've been to safari in South Africa years ago, but recently was feeling like I want to be in Kenya and I want to be in the Masai Mara and I want to see animals in East Africa. I've never done that before. And I got the opportunity. God allowed me to consult with an organization that does impact investing for entrepreneurs in Kenya. And so in September, I was out there working with this organization,
Mm.
doing great work. And I got the opportunity to go to the Masai Mara and do a safari. So that again, not random, but on the bucket list and an incredible experience that I'm grateful for.
Okay. What's a surprising fact about you that most people wouldn't guess?
I shared with somebody yesterday, they were asking me about my career journey. And I always start with craft foods, like we talked about today, running Ritz crackers and managing global businesses. But actually, no one actually knows this, or it's on my LinkedIn profile, but I don't think it's really something people talk about or understand. Is I actually graduated undergrad in chemical engineering, and my first 3 years of work was I was an engineer with Merck Pharmaceutical, and with one of my years, I spent on a construction site with steel toe boots and a hard hat, managing construction workers and building pilot plant facilities for Kraft. I don't think anyone who meets me now would ever think that I would be on a construction site with a hard hat and steel toe boots.
The
But
chemical
that
and
was,
yeah. Oh gosh.
yes.
That's a good
So,
site. The chemical engineer turned MBA turned marketer, etc. With the steel-toed boots. I love it. Okay,
yes,
last question to close us out. If you could switch lives with anybody for a day, who would it be?
I could switch lives with anybody for a day. Who would it be? You know, I honestly, because my faith is so important to me, my relationship with God, to go back to biblical times and experience, like, I would want to be one of the disciples of Jesus. Like in Advent, we're thinking about it. Like, do you imagine, like being Peter, like just walking with Jesus and literally being on earth with him? I would want to experience that. Absolutely. I just
Yeah,
to see
that's
that.
good.
Yeah. Watching The Chosen is not enough. It's like, what would it look like to actually be there with him? That
Yeah.
would be amazing.
I might pick someone besides Peter of the disciples, but
Yeah.
maybe one of the
Well,
more faithful ones.
Well, he gets to walk on water and
Yeah,
see.
true.
I just that's pretty amazing to me.
Yeah.
So good, so good. Well, Sheeba, again, thank you, and thanks for coming back on the show. I mean, such a different conversation, honestly, and just as rich. From our Oreo cookies brand lessons. By the way, if you want to hear that episode, easy to find. It's called episode number 1, 4 years and 5 seasons ago. And so again, thank you for being back on, and just wish you the best in your work, in your advising work, and the investing work that you do. And just, again, thanks for being back on.
Thank you, guys. It was wonderful. I'm so grateful for all that you're doing.
Yes. And for those of you who are listening, I hope you've, again, benefited from today, that you've learned something, you've been challenged, and we'll see you next time. We're grateful for our partners this season, including Virtuous, a software company committed to helping nonprofits grow generosity, Faith Search Partners, an executive search firm specifically for faith-based organizations, and Imago Consulting, an advisory firm that helps nonprofits and businesses grow through innovation. For more episodes, find us wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to subscribe so that you're always up to date. Would you do us a favor? It would be great if you would rate the show and leave us a review. Your feedback is so valuable to us. Follow the show on LinkedIn, or you can reach us at our website at purposeandprofitpodcast.com. On the site, you can also sign up for our email newsletter to get updates whenever we launch a new episode. Thanks for listening.